March 8th, 1990 was a really good date. I was born in Centera Hospital in Newport News, and this photo is my mom holding me for the first time 2 hours after birth. And the reason why I was 2 hours after birth is I was actually adopted. My birth mom, she was really young and she wasn't ready um, or able to be a parent at that time. And so she made this sacrifice to let me be put up for adoption. And so this is my mom, my adopted mom, my real mom in this photo. One of the things I notice about being adopted or being an adopted kid is some don't really look like their parents and some look like their parents, adopted kids. Some don't look like their parents, but they start taking on qualities of their parents. And when I was growing up, I really wanted to be like my dad. He was big, he was strong, he was really into, or is still into, sports. He's always loved NASCAR. I'm not getting into NASCAR, but he's always loved football. And so I really wanted to get into football. I tried hunting from middle school to high school because he was really into hunting. He built a hot rod, a 1934 37 Ford Coupe that still sits in his garage today. He's run tons of trophies for it. And I tried going to car shows at first to see what it would be like to go with those with him, to do things with him. They weren't for me, so I didn't stick with that. But I've always kind of wanted to be like my dad. And one of the things that people would say when I was growing up is, man, you really look like your dad. And it started taking place in middle school and high school, which was cool because that's when hunting started. I have tons of fond memories of not really being in a tree stand for several hours, freezing, extremely cold, but like those drives back and forth from Surrey, Virginia, those 50-minute car rides where I learned how to drive, where we would talk about girls and we would talk about God and we would talk about high school and middle school anxiety problems and what is my future going to be like, and having more responsibility and independence around the house, and those memorable car rides that we used to have. I remember getting into oldies rock in Motown and listening to the same radio station in my room. I had this little alarm clock radio, listening to oldies 92.9 The Wave, and just listening to that radio station simply because that was the radio station that my dad listened into whenever he was in the car. And so I'd pick up on that. But when I was younger, in this serious season of my life, middle school and high school, I loved when people would be like, man, like you look so much like your dad. Or like there'd be new people that would come to church. My dad was an elder in the church. And they would be like, I had no idea that Ryan wasn't your biological son because he looks so much like you. Now, I don't look a lot like him now. Growing up, but there was a season of my life where I looked a lot like my dad. When I was a teen, I had long hair back then. Now I'm like growing bald and it's piecing out, and he still has beautiful hair. And it's really annoying because he's twice my age. But there was a season where I looked a lot like my dad did when he was in high school. People that are married for a long time, they start looking a lot like each other over time. They can have different hair colors, they have different features, but they start taking on these characteristics of each other. At least that's the theory. Or they start taking on, characteristics of each other over time, like just a few things, maybe not physical things, but different mannerisms, facial expressions of each other over time. It's like they were always meant to be together. It's not lovely. Oh my goodness. They look just right together. They just go together. You'll hear people say that about someone that's been married, 10 or 15 years. It's like people that have dogs that look like them. Have you ever seen that? Like someone who they have a dog and they buy the dog, and they looked, they match. And it's crazy. I'm gonna see if I can pull up a picture. All right, here's a good one. This is pretty dope. All right, I'm gonna pull this up real quick. Yo, check this out. Check out this dude in his outfit over here on the right. Like, you have a dog and an owner, and they look very similar. Like, notice his hair and the dog's hair, and the dog's eyes and his eyes. Like, they're twinning right now. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have dogs and owners, who will match over time. My girlfriend has a golden retriever, and we asked the question. We do young adult life groups together on Tuesday nights, and we asked the question before we started our lesson, kind of like what we do in middle school and high school life group, with that book of 1,000 questions. It was, what animal are you most like? And she owns a golden retriever, and she's like, you know what? I'm most like a golden retriever. That was her answer. Over time, we take on the image of people or pets even around us. And it's more than just looking like them. In some ways, we kind of become them. Same with God, but in a bigger, more impactful, meaning everlasting way. Because unlike becoming like your friends or your spouse or your boyfriend or your girlfriend for a season or that random YouTuber you watch, the Bible says we were created in God's image. And what separates any image or lookalike we could ever take on from God, we were created in God's image. It separates any other image we could have, any other lookalike, any other relationship that we kind of take on that image. God, we were created in God's image. Genesis 1:27 says, so God created mankind in his own image. There's that word. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So if our origin story is so amazing, so grandiose, why do we feel sometimes so insignificant? Why? Why do we feel so insignificant if our origin story, like you're thinking about like a superhero, or an amazing historical figure, or, I don't even know, like a superhero or something. Like, you think of like an origin story that's just like amazing, like Superman coming from outer space, something like that. If our origin story is so amazing, so grandiose, so spectacular, why do we feel so insignificant, broken, discarded, anxiety-ridden, like we don't know what our future has in store? How come I don't feel special, even though God says in Genesis that creating humanity was such a big deal? It's so special. He says very good. After he says, when he builds everything else, he just says good. And he creates humans, and it's very good. I don't always feel or think very good about myself. Do you always feel good or think very good about yourself? Like, what if getting back to what we were created to be is what's actually missing in our lives? What if getting back to how and who we were made to be is actually what's missing, and that's why we feel so insignificant all the time, or sometimes, or part of the time? What if there's a piece that is missing that could complete us and forge our origin story into who we are today? What if we're missing something really important to who we really are? There's this verse passage that we've been looking through what Paul writes to the church in Ephesus. It's coming from Ephesians 4. And what we're going to do today is tack on verse 24. 2 weeks ago, we started off verses 20 through 22. And we read about this life, about taking off the old self, this broken self, the insignificance, discarded, hurt self that is holding us back. It's the identity. It's not just the do's and the don'ts. It's not just the bad behaviors and the good behaviors. It's not a rule book to follow, but rather it's who we were never supposed to be, but we ended up becoming. And we talked about taking off that old self. And then verse 23, we looked at renewing our mind and thinking differently about ourselves and realizing that we're this masterpiece created by God and that we're meant for good. And today, we're going to hit verse 24. And I'm going to read it all the way through. So check this out. It's right off my side. In red is what we're hitting on today. It says this: that, however, is not the way of life you learned when you first heard about Christ and were taught in him in accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. You were taught with regard to your former way of life, to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your mind, and to put on, here it is, to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. You were created to be like God, not to be God, but to be like God, created in his image. Focus on this reality that we were made for him, for his goodness, for his purpose. But we have been deceived by what? Our own thinking, our own broken desires, living in this broken world, choosing whether today I'm going to follow God or today I'm going to follow myself or these desires, deceiving as they may be, and giving into them the deception, the corruption, the mask, the funhouse mirror, as we've been talking about the last 2 weeks. Or we can choose today to put on the new self. It says in this verse, you have been what? You've been taught. You know what is truth. But there's still the deception. There's still the lie. There's still the corruption in your life, and you wonder why nothing's different. There's the version of you that you've become. It's a mix match of old fallen you and the new you, and it's always in conflict. It's always in turmoil. It's this tension. There's always so much tension in your life, and sometimes, man, the old you wins out in what decisions and what you decide you're going to do today, in the next day, how you're going to live. Then there's the version of you that's meant to be an accurate reflection of God. It's not the deceitfulness. It's not the lies. It's not the trickery. It's not all those insecurities and that pent up feeling of brokenness and nothingness that you experience, where you're questioning every decision and worrying about tomorrow. There is a version of you that is a reflection of God, where goodness pours out of it, where self-worth pours out of it, where confidence and boldness pours out of it. It's what you were always meant to be, what you were created to be. And it's what's always been missing from your life. And this version of you requires a faith and trust in Jesus. And it might be that after you've made a decision for Christ, you're sitting here and you're saying, what now? The what now requires a faith and trust in Jesus. It's what you got. It's what the choice that you made into. And if you haven't made this decision, I'm going to tell you, the decision requires a faith and trust in Jesus, to take off the old, renew your mind, and put on the new self. Jesus has become the version of me that I can't become for myself. Like we read in the New Testament, there was not a single perfect person in the world. No one was without sin. And yet Christ came, God came in the flesh, became a babe, who became a man, who walked the earth, who was tempted just like me and you. And he knew no sin. The only sin that Christ knew is the sin that he bore on the cross to die for sinners like me and you. But we read about his example, the way he lived life, the way that he strove to live. pure, blameless, and holy. And in this whole new humanity, this truth of life, he's like, hey, follow me, imitate me, follow my example. The new you need an example. You need a direction pointer. You need a set point for where to go. So Jesus gives us this clear example. Until you find yourself in God, like this verse says, like the truth that you've learned. If you heard about Christ, you were taught about your former way of your life. You were taught to renew your mind, taught the new self, created in this new humanity image. Until you find yourself in God, like this verse says, you can't obtain true righteousness and holiness. But once you place your faith in Christ and surrender to him, it is straight up game on. So, if you're at the point where you've made this decision for Christ, I'm going to tell you, like, God first loved you. Now you get to do sacrificial love and following him. It is game on. He's giving you the Holy Spirit to lead you in this journey. It is game on. So, like, why are you waiting? Why are you sitting around waiting for this journey to start? Putting on the new self is how we get to be, how we start to be who we are always meant to be. Paul kind of talks about it like this. He talks about it a lot in Philippians, where he's like, hey, I haven't obtained it yet, but I'm striving towards it. It's this journey of, second coming, Christ coming back, being made new isn't here yet. But then the Bible is like, hey, you are new, and you have this unique opportunity right now. Paul also talks about, like, as in moaning, the world is moaning, it's groaning in eager anticipation for Christ coming back. But there's also this opportunity here right now. And my question for you is, are you seizing the opportunity? Because Jesus' salvation gives you access to unique opportunity right now for you, to bridge heaven and earth in your own space, to bridge righteousness and holiness in your broken world, to bridge a connection between people who are lost and Jesus, who is the light of the world. Jesus gives you the opportunity and the access to be like-minded, to renew yourself. Jesus' salvation isn't just a one-time thing that allows us to go on living just like we've always been until the next thing comes, until the second coming comes. Jesus' salvation is letting us be who we were always meant to be. Putting on the new self is how we get to start being who we are, who we're meant to be, who we have to be, who we should become. It might not sound so easy, but you have the steps to this point. I've given you the steps. The steps are in these 4 passages here. I gave you the reason for why you should do it in 17 through 20. All right. I told you why you actually have to do it. Like Paul's like, if you've made a decision, you should have known that this was coming. You were taught that this was always going to happen. And it's the best thing that could ever happen to you, because now you actually have the power to do it. You want to be the new humanity. You want to be the saved people that God has called to himself. Take off the old self, the old you, this that sticks around, that lingers, that is part of this sinful, broken world that doesn't resemble Jesus. It's got to go. The old self is a quick death. It can't save you. It can't take you to heaven. It can't get you to where you're supposed to be. It can't linger. Don't let the old self create distance between you and God, where Jesus has come in the gap and said, hey, I'm the bridge. Don't let the old self create distance between you and God, where Jesus said, hey, I am the bridge. No one comes to the Father except through me. The old self's already done enough damage, it's time to go. Think differently about yourself. Ephesians 2:10. It says, we talked about it last week, God's handiwork. You are God's masterpiece. You're created to do good. What works, man? It's the works of Christ. You were created for a unique purpose in such a time as this. Start realizing that God made you for more, and it's very good. It's not just the bland, ordinary. It's not just you hanging out and doing the same thing day after day, living in meaninglessness. It's very, very good. There is an opportunity here, and all you have to do is seize it. All you have to do is say, hey, God, I present myself before you. I'm ready. You're not a mistake. You have a purpose. So start telling yourself that you matter and what you do matters. Start thinking differently about yourself so you can approach every single day differently than you have been. Put on the new self. This is who Jesus is. This is who Jesus was when he walked the earth as a human. Jesus modeled who you were always meant to be. So stop wasting your days. Take off the old. Renew your mind. Put on the new. Accept the challenge that Paul's giving you. We're gonna go through this challenge. The next 4 weeks, we're gonna be hitting up the challenge, the real challenge of renewing your mind, of taking off the old, of putting on the new. And you guys can see in this column the old and new, verses 4:17 through 6:9. Take off lies, put on truth is next week. Anger, peace, theft, generosity, gossip, encourage, revenge, forgiveness, promiscuity, self-control, drunk, God's spirit. We're going to be hitting it up. And at this point, I hope you realize this is not a verse of do's and don'ts. This is getting you to be who you're always meant to be. I invite you to join me on a challenge the next 10 weeks as we explore this. I dare you to try this out every single week and see if your life isn't any better. I guarantee you it will be. High school life group is tonight. Middle school life group, we started second service in person on Sundays. If you can't make that, we got middle school life group virtually Sunday nights. See you there.